Welcome to the Echo Changer podcast with myself, Jacob.
And myself, Harley.
So today we're going to be covering the first of a series of deep dives into ancient Egypt. We covered the Old Kingdom of Egypt, which is just the start. I think one of the biggest things that I've discovered from looking into this a bit more is definitely the scale of ancient Egypt.
Oh, it's vast, yeah.
And just the sheer amount of time that they were around. There's so many different eras where they had sort of varying amounts of influence and power, and the culture changes a lot as well.
And most of it internal too, as I think we're going to get onto later. Some explorations further afield, but part of the reason that their longevity, I think, does come down to they have everything they need on the Nile. They don't really need anything else particularly. They do little, they get their gold and their ivory and things from elsewhere, but they have everything they need and they don't really feel the need to go looking too further afield, which probably means ultimately they're a lot safer.
There's a lot to be said for, obviously, their society was very much focused on kind of their own internal prosperity. I mean, obviously there's still power structures within that with, the royalty and the kind of ruling class, but at the same time, there's no focus on spending money on the military for external wars. There's not really much of an interest in having much of a presence abroad as well. So obviously we'll cover a bit more over the next few episodes in terms of how that changes over time, because obviously again we're working with very vast amounts of time passing here. I'm excited to get into this one. There's a little bit of a brief overview. I'll try and put this at the start of the next couple of episodes just for context to keep things on track and everything. But essentially, when looking at ancient Egypt, you have a lot of different periods. So we started off last time with the Old Kingdom.
And a little bit of the pre-dynastic.
Yeah, a little bit of kind of the early stages as well.
Building up to the Old Kingdom.
Yeah. There are a series of intermediate kingdoms, or intermediate periods rather, that take place in between the different stages.
Somebody described it well, I think it was J.M. Roberts in his Penguin History of the World. He describes it as like a wedding cake, with each of the kingdoms are the bits of sponge, and then the jam in between the sponge layers is the intermediate periods and those are the bits where there's a lot of change happening, upheaval, as you say. So a lot of civil war. I think in each of the intermediate periods there's some form of civil war between north and south, and there's a sense of how before you can get going on a kingdom again, it's, of course, this is all sort of a lens placed over it after the fact. They didn't think of themselves as being part of any kind of old/middle kingdom, whatever. But things stabilize, things come back together, and at that point you're into another kingdom.
Yeah, because also it's interesting to see that there's different kind of circumstances that bring about the end to the different kingdoms, and kind of reminds me of, there's like a chart or a diagram or something, and it's just like the cycle of strong men create good times create weak men create bad times
create strong men, or something.
And then it's kind of like the full circle. You've listened to our Cycle of Empire episode. A lot of the things that we'll probably cover will relate to this, again proving that the theory is pretty safe.
It's pretty solid.
Predicting the life cycle of all different empires. So this one, we're going to be covering the first intermediate period, which took place between roughly 2181 to 2055 BC. So again, we're looking very, very far back here, like 4,000 years. So this is the period.
This is still, and it's probably worth saying just to kind of conceptualize it, this is still further back from 0 AD than we are now. So we're still further away going back than we are going forward by just a little bit. So
which is crazy. It's crazy to think.
That's an extraordinary notion.
So what we're going to be covering in this episode is going to be kind of directly following on from the Old Kingdom. And then in subsequent episodes, we'll then cover the Middle Kingdom and then the other intermediate periods following into the New Kingdom as well. So there's a lot to cover, but I'm excited to get going. And
of course, as always.
Yeah, so to set the scene, we obviously come to the end of the Old Kingdom, and you've got a full dynasty of pharaohs and rulers that have had power and done various different things. Obviously, lots of infrastructure in terms of building pyramids, expansion of bureaucracy and social systems,
kind of meritocracy coming out of the big building projects. Quite a healthy sort of civil service.
So it's the beginnings of that kind of organized society, really. But there are a few key distinctions to make here, and obviously while there's a lot of increases of social cohesion because of central government and lots of different things going on in that sense, the relationship that people have with the ruling class or the pharaohs is quite interesting to look at, because in the Old Kingdom, pharaohs are seen as, they're the absolute deity. So they're absolutely divine, God on earth,
Yeah.
You probably, I mean, I'd have to check.
Horus specifically, I think they're all claiming lineage from Horus.
Yes,
The son of
similar to like in
Osiris.
Greek mythology as well, where they all kind of claim like, oh, well, I've got DNA from Poseidon. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm part of Zeus.
the
It's like, well,
ultimate-
everyone was part of Zeus, mate. You know what he
Yeah.
got up to when he came down to Earth all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah.
So I don't think that's anything unique, to be honest.
Yeah. It's like pulling out Burke's peerage and just like whacking it on the table.
Yeah, literally. So yeah, the relationship between the pharaohs and the people kind of in the Old Kingdom is very much that of like god and citizen.
Very
It's
distant,
still
very
very,
aloof.
very distant, very far away.
And I think that's expressed in the pyramids too, because only somebody who genuinely saw themselves as a god could decide to build something so monumental but so massively selfish.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And that really, I mean, I suppose you could say a New Deal type, you know, creates work for, and the people that are building them do get paid. But it is a vanity project, and there's no real sense in the Old Kingdom, I think, of not that I've seen anyway from what I've read, of building kind of public works that are going to benefit the people in any way. It's purely massive mortuary temples for the kings.
Yes. And we'll see over the course of the next few episodes as we move into kind of the Middle Kingdom and the intermediate periods in future, just how Egyptian society sort of shifts away from those massive infrastructure projects of building these pyramids for the kings, more towards building like tombs, but then building more temples for everybody to kind of go to.
Yeah.
Because another important distinction with the Old Kingdom moving into the intermediate period is that religion is kind of reserved for the upper classes. So your kind of regular workers and everything wouldn't really be that bothered about it.
No.
It wouldn't really have much of an impact on their lives. It's pretty much solely for the kings and pharaohs.
Well, and as well, if the
rulers.
afterlife is supposed to be a kind of reflection of what you experienced in real life, then your average citizen doesn't have an awful lot to look forward to. In the same,
I don't want that.
Like, well, I've kind of, yeah, exactly. I've had a bit of a crap time of it on Earth. I
I
don't need to
I
replace.
can't wait for my afterlife
Yeah.
9 to 5. That's
Yeah,
gonna be
exactly.
great.
Exactly. Probably like 7 to 7 or
Oh, you
whatever.
were
it is.
so good at hauling stones for
Yeah.
60 years. You get
Sun
to
up.
do it again
Yeah, sun up
for
to sun
all
down.
eternity.
So you can understand why would they invest a huge amount in the religion if their afterlife is just going to look much like it has on.
But also,
the
you
life on
look at like the level of education that they would have been having at that stage as well. It wouldn't have been a priority for a lot of society at that stage. So there's not really any need or way to even portray that to your average Joe kind of
Well, quite.
at the time. So we've talked about the Old Kingdom, and I think one of the key things with the intermediate periods is it's kind of the culmination of a lot of different problems that all come together at the same time. In a similar way that we see with kind of like the stages of empire where there's an age of prosperity that then leads to kind of decadence and a collapse. Similar things happen to Egypt, but a kind of widely agreed sort of start of the intermediate period was the culmination of a series of weak leaders. So obviously you have some of the really great pharaohs that, you know, achieve a lot in their lives. They, you know, spend massively on kind of building great monuments in the pyramids and advancing Egyptian society and their stature. And then you sort of get into more kind of weak leaders that are maybe more personally decadent. They maybe just focus everything on kind of on their own enjoyment of life.
Yeah, and you get the succession crisis specifically because of someone we covered briefly in the last one, a guy called Pepi II, who lives so long that his own sons start to die off before him, and they had all had loads of kids.
Yeah.
So you've suddenly got all these various factions that are going to be fighting to
More
inherit,
power,
to
yeah,
inherit
to
the
take
power.
power overall.
So you have this massive succession crisis, which leads to basically civil war once Pepi's gone, and that inaugurates, along with a massive famine that came at the same time, and the people connected the two in their minds. They thought an aging pharaoh, again we talked about it before, they had this funny sort of athletics thing that after 30 years and then every 3 years after that, and the Heb said, where the pharaoh would have to perform physical tasks to prove that they were still strong. And of course you had this absurd situation where Pepi is in his 90s and he's being carried around by guards, and it becomes a complete facade, and they think, oh no, what have we done? We've got this old pharaoh who's weak, and therefore the land is weak, because at the same time you have this drought and then famine that comes through. So it is very unfortunate timing, and it does confirm for them their suspicions about the connection between the age of the pharaoh and the health,
and the kind of
health
of
of
the
the
country.
pharaoh, health of the land. Yeah.
But it's also, I mean, again, when you look at Egypt and how much they relied on the Nile for like their food farming, economy, for trade and everything like that, it's very easy to see how when something like a natural disaster did happen, that the Nile floods very frequently. But when the Nile would flood and it would destroy crops and things like that, like if you're not really that clued up on, you don't know how the weather cycle works.
No.
You don't know water cycle.
You're gonna look closer to home.
Tides. You're gonna think like, wow, okay, the world's just ending. I guess. Like,
yeah, pretty much.
I guess I'll die. I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it must have felt like it. It was a chaotic period. And if you were just an average Joe...
Then that was, you just kind of had to deal with it, I suppose.
It would have been scary. It would have been really scary. Because there was fighting, there was unrest in the land, as well as being famine and all the rest of it. So it would have been a scary time to be alive.
Yeah, it gets a bit scarier, to be honest, in the first intermediate period, because we got a perfect storm of succession crisis after succession crisis. There was a large famine that was caused by the Nile actually flooding around this kind of the start of this period, so in the 2180s. So obviously there's food shortages, there's widespread famine, there's destruction of like homes, and obviously that causes a lot of turmoil in itself. And then with a volatile political climate, that's obviously not going to be a good time to be around. So
I can't remember the name of the guy, but there's a guy who they found his tomb, and he was one of these what they call nomarchs, which we'll get onto. One of these local, basically sort of mayors, governors, that kind of level of a local region. And he's boasting in his tomb about how whilst everyone else was in total chaos and, parents were eating their children, he really exaggerates the whole thing. He says, while people were eating other people and it was all chaos, I alone looked after my people and my people were happy. And
so my steak was juicy.
Yeah. He just sort of flexes in his tomb.
Because the Egyptian money spread
pretty much,
on his hieroglyphs.
That's kind of reading his hieroglyphs. That's basically what it is. But he's right in this period. He's one of these local governors who takes the opportunity in his tomb to really boast about how well he did.
That kind of leads us into, obviously there's more turmoil that goes on, because with the rise of organised central government and state mechanisms, you're going to have more local governors. So obviously you'd have like the Pharaoh at the top of the pyramid, not really a pun intended on that. Really, they did kind of invent it, I suppose, so I guess we can give them credit for that.
Enough.
But so obviously you have the Pharaoh at the top, and then that kind of filters down through like kind of like lower nobility, then into kind of regional governors more. You then kind of ended up, like we said, with the succession crisis, you had different rival factions that would come out and claim their own bit of territory and then start trying to fight the other ones going around. In the Old Kingdom, the capital was in Memphis, so that was the central seat of power, but with some of these smaller regional powers coming up, they kind of split away. So you had the traditional nobles ruling from Memphis, but then you also had other rival factions in, I think it was Herakleopolis. We'll put it up on the screen.
There's some difficult names.
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of this, I'm sure. And then also Thebes as well. That was also. Yes. So obviously you have these different, essentially at least three major warring factions that were vying for power. A lot of this power was going to the regional governors. So again, it's fragmented even more than just that initial power struggle. Another defining thing with this is obviously because the people are so split, customs start changing, because you obviously have people with different values being in charge, and it's not just the god Pharaoh kind of deity on earth. So you've got more of an adoption of religion by the masses in this period as well. When we say that this period, obviously this is 150 years. So this is a very long period of time.
Yeah. For a sort of interval, it's quite long.
Oh yeah, it just illustrates just how vast the time is.
Even the intervals are huge.
Yeah, so we'll take a break from greatness for 300 years, and then we'll get back.
Just have a little nap.
We'll just fight each other a little bit.
Yeah,
a few little civil wars never hurt anyone. Well, it'd be fine.
Bit of fun. But it's a bit boring if everything's going well all the time.
I always wanted to go to the afterlife. I just fancy seeing what it's
let's
like.
Get on with it.
Let's get going. So then the first intermediate period then kind of ends with Mentuhotep. Mentuhotep II, and he defeats the rival factions and reunifies Egypt. So obviously it takes a little while, but then eventually we get this unifying force that can bring the country back together into one entity. And then he kicks off then the Middle Kingdom and this sort of second era of growth and prosperity for Egypt as a whole. So that would then bring us on to the Middle Kingdom, which began in around sort of 1600 BC, 1600s BC rather.
Or rather, sorry, I think it ends in 1600s BC, doesn't it? But it starts the Middle Kingdom at around 2000.
Yes, no, you're right. Yeah, I always get it mixed the wrong way around because
it's confusing.
Yeah, it does get a bit confusing.
It's
you think why are we going down?
It's like in Oliver Stone's film Alexander the Great, just called Alexander. For American audiences, he initially edited it with just the dates. And of course, the dates, as you're going forward, are obviously going backwards in terms of the minus numbers. But American audience didn't understand this, so they had to just say 50 years later, 100 years later, because it was confusing people that the numbers were getting smaller, but we were going forward in time rather than backwards. So it's always a bit of a confusing.
A bit of a tricky one to remember.
Yeah. But anyway, that's sort of...
Well, that kind of wraps up the first intermediate period. And I guess it's interesting because, again, we mentioned it already, but there's a very distinct shift, obviously, between the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom in terms of the way that Egypt perceives itself. A lot of the politics is very much majority inward facing. So at this stage, at least, there's not really any external threats to this degree we see later in the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom. But all of this kind of strife is internal. So you have all these different rival factions with different beliefs, different values. Well, I mean, different beliefs in the sense of like how they want to rule, not the cultural beliefs necessarily. It'd be interesting to sort of see how this changes afterwards.
Thank you, Jacob. It was interesting to learn about the first intermediate period. I think it often gets left out because people focus on the big kingdoms, obviously.
Well, it's a bit of a mouthful, to be honest. It's like, have you ever thought about the first intermediate period of ancient Egypt?
They need
between the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom.
It needs rebranding, I think. Yeah, it's a bit.
we need an acronym or some kind.
Yeah, exactly. FIP.
But actually, no, you know what? I could catch on. I could see that.
So we've got OK, FIP, MK, SIP.
And we remember this episode. We'll see.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope you've enjoyed, and like I said, we're going to be continuing our sort of short series on the different stages of Egypt. So yeah, stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.